Donald Trump has promised big changes once he's in the White House, and that may end up including the United States' decades-old One China policy. Under that policy, Washington has formal diplomatic ties with Beijing, but not with Taiwan. However, the president-elect told the Wall Street Journal that that's up for negotiation. More now from Stephen Jiang in Beijing.
If business tycoon Donald Trump thinks everything in the world is negotiable, he may be soon reminded as the next U.S. president that at least in the eyes of the Beijing government, one issue is absolutely non-negotiable. That is the One China policy. Officials here have reminded him and his team time and again in the past few weeks that Taiwan is China's core interest and the One China principle is the cornerstone of the bilateral relationship between Beijing and Washington. They'd like to say that every U.S. president since Jimmy Carter has committed to this policy and stuck to it, and they certainly hope the Trump White House would do the same instead of derailing 4 decades of development and achievements. But Mr. Trump does have a point about the U.S. does sell billions of dollars of arms to Taiwan to allow it to defend itself against a potential Chinese attack. But it's exactly this kind of strategic ambiguity in the One China policy that's allowed Beijing, Washington, as well as Taipei to maintain relative peace and stability in the decades past. So at least on this very sensitive issue, what's being said matters as much as what's being done. Now, on other issues, Chinese officials have been quite restrained and measured in their response to Mr. Trump's remarks, including issues like trade, the South China Sea, and cybersecurity. What they have been saying here is this relationship has so much going for it if more cooperation, less confrontation is the attitude both sides adopt. They also like to point out to the phone conversation Mr. Trump had with Chinese President Xi Jinping after Trump's election that both leaders have said mutual respect is very important in dealing with each other. One other thing they like to bring up is that Mr. Trump is not president yet, so what he has been saying so far is not official U.S. policy. And the Chinese government pays more attention to official policies instead of a leader's style and personalities. But privately, many officials have expressed to me that they are unsure about how to deal with this new U.S. president who likes to conduct foreign policy online. Some have even asked me for suggestions. My response, follow him on Twitter, read his tweets, and have an answer ready for reporters like us. Stephen Jiang, CNN, Beijing.
And here's another bone of contention between the U.S. and China. Beijing has issued a warning to the U.S. after its nominee for Secretary of State suggested blocking access to the South China Sea. Our Brian Todd reports.
They've staked a claim to thousands of acres of what were sandbars and reefs. They've used sophisticated equipment like these ships, pumping sand through those thin tubes to create islands. Then they built airfields with towering radar stations, constructed ports, deployed weapons there, even built barracks. China's military buildup of these islands in the South China Sea has angered the Obama administration. The U.S. has sent ships and planes very near the islands, sometimes drawing Chinese warnings.
This is the Chinese Navy. This is the Chinese Navy. Please go away quickly.
Now, a government-run Chinese newspaper is warning of a possible war with the U.S. over the man-made islands. It's spurred by this comment from Secretary of State nominee Rex Tillerson at his confirmation hearings.
We're going to have to send China a clear signal that first, the island building stops, and second, your access to those islands is also not going to be allowed.
The Chinese newspaper says, quote, unless Washington plans to wage a large-scale war in the South China Sea, then trying to block China's access to the islands would be, quote, foolish. And Tillerson had better bone up on nuclear power strategies if he wants to force a big nuclear power to withdraw from its own territories. Pentagon officials are calling on China to reduce tensions. How could the U.S. deny China access to those islands?
You would want to start with a naval blockade. That's what people would think, Cuban Missile Crisis in the modern era. But this is a lot of space to cover. I would assume that you're talking about blocking access to the 7 islands that China occupies here in the Spratlys, out of these dozens. You'd also have to deal with their air capabilities. This is not just a naval blockade. China has 4 different airstrips built on the largest of the islands out there. They have hangar space for a full regiment of fighter aircraft at each one of these. That's an awful lot of capability. And finally, this is not without cost. These are not defenseless features. What you're looking at here are advanced air defense and anti-missile systems. This is an anti-aircraft gun.
Analysts are worried about escalation.
The biggest fear is of accidental conflict, The South China Sea, even under the best possible set of circumstances, is going to get more crowded and more contentious. There are going to be more commercial ships in the area, and there are going to be more military assets.
A key question in all of this, did Rex Tillerson speak directly for President-elect Trump when he said the U.S. should deny China access to those islands? I spoke to a Trump transition official who walked back slightly from Tillerson's comments. The official said denying access doesn't necessarily have to mean a naval blockade, that there are other options, including economic ones. When I pressed on what those might be, the official said there are no details yet, that all of this still has to be worked out. Brian Todd, CNN, Washington.